KTN Newsline tonight, we want to dissect the Azimio La Umoja One Kenya Coalition Manifesto that was unveiled yesterday by the presidential candidate Raila Odinga together with his running mate Martha Karua, saying that the country needs to expect a lot from them, especially during the first 100 days in office. But how achievable is the manifesto when it comes to the country's economy and the debt that we owe as a country? To have this discussion with me is political analyst and political scientist, that is Professor Peter Wanyandi, joining us from a city center studio. You can see him on your screen right there. And also Nyando, Member of Parliament, Jared Okello, joining us virtually for this conversation. Gentlemen, good evening, and thank you so much for joining us here on a KTN Newsline tonight. Good evening, Jared Okello.
Hey, good evening, Brenda. How are you doing?
I'm fine. And good evening, Professor, joining us from a city center studio.
Good evening.
Thank you for joining us, gentlemen, once again here on a KTN Newsline, for granting us your time to dissect this important discussion that Kenyans need to understand, even as these presidential candidates traverse different parts of this country to woo their supporters to support them come the August 9th general election. But let me begin with Professor Wanyandi. The economic plan for the country that Raila Odinga unveiled yesterday, how realistic is it?
Thank you very much. I think we need, first of all, to place the discussion in context, because just talking about the figures and the economic plan without understanding the entire manifesto would actually not be fair. First of all, this manifesto has three pillars. It has the economic pillar, it has the social transformation pillar, and it has finally the governance pillar. And I thought that is important to highlight, because the specifics that you want us to talk about this evening must be understood against those three major pillars. Secondly, it must also be emphasized that the details contained in the manifesto were arrived at as a result of the consultations that the Azimio presidential candidate held with citizens of this country last year. Mm-hmm. And it's on the basis of those consultations that when the Azimio movement was launched in December last year, the current presidential candidate indicated that he was going to ensure that the people's expectations were met.
All right.
So in a sense, therefore, this is a manifesto that focuses on the interests of the people of Kenya.
All right. So now, Prof.
Having said that,
Yes, Prof.
Yes, having said that, I then want to say that looking at this manifesto, a lot of the things that I said they are actually realistic. They are possible to do.
All right.
And the economic revolution that this manifesto talks about is basically an attempt to deviate or to move away from the traditional way of looking at the Kenyan economy by introducing new thinking, new approaches to economic management of this country. So they are possible.
They are possible. From where you sit, this manifesto can be implemented in a realistic way. Let me bring in Nyando, Member of Parliament,
exactly.
Jared Okello. So when I looked at the manifesto that was unveiled yesterday, looking at it very keenly, it had a part of NASA and a Jubilee Manifesto, which begs the question, how does the Raila economics differ from President Uhuru Kenyatta's?
Well, I thank you very much, Brenda. I was present yesterday during the launch of Raila Odinga's manifesto, Raila Matakarwa manifesto, and I would say that was a masterclass advocacy that spoke to the hearts of the Kenyan people. Let me take a tangent from what my brother, Professor Wanyande, has alluded to, that before Right Honorable Raila declared his candidature for presidency, he did hold nationwide assemblies, visiting various counties, listening to the plight of the Kenyans. And the team that was going around with him, of course, including myself, collected and collated these views. These were the views that informed the manifesto that was launched yesterday, in a way of responding to the plight of the Kenyans. Mm-hmm. And that is why when they retreated, having gone around the nation to come up with a manifesto that responded adequately so to the plight of the Kenyans, they had to merge, just as you have correctly said, what President Uhuru Kenyatta had under the Big Four agenda, which touched on manufacturing, affordable housing, healthcare, and many other things, in line with Article 43 of our Constitution, together with what Raila Odinga has always, believed in. And as Kenyans know, Raila has always presented himself to Kenyans with solutions to problems that perennially bedevil them. And the manifesto that was launched yesterday, even though merged to be one document, responds to what the Kenyans have always yearned for. Mm-hmm. And if you allow me, I would quickly take some snippets of certain things that were shared by the Right Honorable Raila Odinga. And even before that, you realized that Raila was talking off the cuff for a better part of his speech. When you have somebody talking off the cuff and not making reference in a piece of paper, that tells you how convicted that person is to the ideals that he or she is presenting. And for a long time, he spoke his heart until then the summary part where he was looking at certain documents, but in bullet form.
All right.
So allow me, Brenda, even though we will come to the gist of the whole issues, mm-hmm. when he spoke about the freedom of the press, and that really spoke to me, you cannot wish away the participatory role played by the media, shining bright light in the dark corners of our governance. And the media has played this responsibility so well that even those who are, in the business of dipping their ugly hands in the cookie jar, mm-hmm. would always be very fearful and, step back because they know there's another brother or sister called the media that is watching. And this was coming at the heels of certain presidential candidates, castigating the role that is being played by the media. I think it was so important that the Prime Minister came forth to give the media the confidence that what they are doing, certain times criticizing candidates, which is within their purview of operations, is the right thing to do.
All right,
so that really spoke.
Okay, just hold on to that thought, Jared Okello, because when I look at his manifesto, it's centered on a 10-point agenda, one of them being Azimio la Ugatuzi, Azimio la Jitihada, Azimio la Kinamama, Azimio la Ukulima, Azimio la Viwandani. Then, the Inawezekana slogan, which is Azimio la Wananchi. Then he talked about Baba Care. Father went ahead to talk about waste not a single child, then Maji kwa kila boma and the administrative continuity. So, Professor Wanyande, I mean, it's the same question that I've asked Jared Okello in terms of the Raila economics. How different is it from President Uhuru Kenyatta economics? Because that is what Kenyans want to know.
Yeah, let me say this. That is, hello?
Yes, I can hear you.
I can't hear her. Hello?
All right. As you try to sort out this sort of challenge Professor Nyande is getting on his side, let me bring in Jared Okello, who was present yesterday, definitely, because that is his party leader, who was unveiling his manifesto yesterday for the country. And yes, you've told us, yes, this is the plan that he has when he talks about the right of the media, also during this time when media is being castigated on how they've been covering election campaigns for different presidential candidates. But you've not really answered my question openly, how Raila economics differs from that one of President Uhuru Kenyatta.
Well, you will definitely take lots of invariables between these two leaders. President Uhuru Kenyatta came up in his second term with a 4-point agenda that was going to address the needs of the Kenyan people. Right Honorable Raila Odinga, which within our quarters we would call the president designate now, goes a little further, because in President Uhuru's manifesto for the country did not pay much credence to the issues of devolution. And Prime Minister Raila Odinga understands that you cannot develop the country at the top and sidelining the participatory role played by our counties. And probably you had not been born, Brenda, but there's a time when we had a government that used to say, Siasambaya Maishambaya. In other words, any sort of criticism leveled against the government warranted total lack of funds towards that particular area. And that informs why certain areas are lagging behind when it comes to issues development. Mm-hmm. So what the Prime Minister is saying, whereas you may have a president in future who may just take, the same political trajectory as the others that we have seen before, but every place will have its rightful share, enshrined in the Constitution of 35% of our, collection, an annual collection, mm-hmm. going straight to the counties so that they can sit down as the leadership together with the people that they represent and come up with budgets that respond to their needs. So that is very different from President Uhuru Kenyatta.
All right.
Whereas President Uhuru Kenyatta has said they have given in excess of 15% to our counties, but really that is charitable. What we do not want is to see a president ruling on the edges of his, charitable behavior. This must be enshrined in the Constitution, and the Prime Minister has said that within 100 days of his governance, he's going to fast track mm-hmm. How this can be enshrined into our Constitution. So that is totally different from what President Uhuru Kenyatta has done.
All right. So, gentlemen, I'd like us to have, a breakdown, because I believe, Professor Nyande, now you're back, and you'll be able to see this on your screen, that City Center Studio, a breakdown of what, of the Azimio team manifesto, what was launched yesterday by Raila Odinga, who's the flag bearer for that coalition. And anytime from now, you'll be seeing it on your screen. So let me have it on a screen, please. The Azimio Manifesto, what it says. So let's have a look at the first one. And what we have on your screen right there, we are talking about devolution, something that Jared Okello is trying to explain to us. And Azimio's focus is about increasing devolved resources, advance one county one county, one product program, and also provide material and technical support that they'll need. And then I'd like us not to stop it on this second manifesto, which is Jua Kali, and the SMEs, which is recognition of prior learning certificate program, encourage MOUs between Jua Kali Association and TVETs, and spearhead made in Kenya products. Let's just stop there. Let's not even go to that women empowerment. We'll be getting into that later on. Let me just stop it at the first two manifestos before we move to women empowerment. And Prof, I believe you can get me clearly. When you've seen that breakdown of the Azimio Manifesto, talking about empowering the Jua Kali sector and also promoting made in Kenya products. And this is something that even President Uhuru Kenyatta's administration has been grappling with, how to strengthen the Jua Kali sector as one way of increasing also expanding the tax bracket, one of also promoting the textile industry. That is something the president has been very keen on. And we're also seeing Raila Odinga also being keen on these two sectors. Professor Nyande
has disappeared. Yeah, let me say this. First of all, I was not able to hear my colleague Mheshimiwa Jared when he was speaking, so I don't know what he said. But as far as the issue of just race is concerned, I want to approach it from the point of view of the MSMEs. This Jua Kali thing you're talking about.
Yes.
Because they are part of the MSMEs. And the manifesto that was presented yesterday, when you read it very carefully, it's addressing a major sector, a major economic sector in this country, in the sense that the MSMEs contribute significantly to job creation and employment. Mm-hmm. I think the figures at the moment indicate that there are about 15 million people working in the MSME sector. That is a huge number of people employed people. Mm-hmm. Secondly, the figures indicate that this sector contributes up to about 40% of the country's gross domestic product. And they account for about 50% of jobs that are created annually. So it is a huge economic sector. Unfortunately, this sector has not received the attention that it deserves, given the contribution that it makes to the economy. Mm-hmm. It is against this background that I think the Azimio leadership decided to focus on this sector, and it argues in the manifesto that one way to promote the contribution of this sector to our economy and enhance it is to look at the challenges that the sector faces. Mm-hmm. Among these challenges, if I may just cite one or two, is the kind of technology that the people employed in this sector are using. They are not using what you might call modern technology. Secondly, it is the work sites, the places they work in, mm-hmm. are not really conducive to their ability to produce maximally.
All right.
It is this that needs to be addressed, and I think the Azimio Manifesto addresses this.
All right. All right. So let me bring in Jared Okello. And you know, when one of the things that Raila passionately talked about and touched the hearts of his supporters, when he talked about the social protection, 6,000 shillings per household, where no one is employed. But then the question in the minds of every Kenyan, and also in my mind, is where will the money come from?
Okay. Brenda, before I come there, allow me to say a few things about the Jua Kali sector, which Baba really talked much about. Firstly, he reckons that the Jua Kali sector tends to work under fine weather because they're just out there in the sun, and that is where the name Jua Kali came from. So he recognizes that sheds need to be built so that even when it rains, even at night, they can still go about their businesses uninterrupted. So that is very key going forward. Of course, as you have said, he mentioned about the prior learning certificate, which will help them gain certain tenders offered by government. You understand that through the PFM Act and the Disposal Act, Procurement and Asset and Disposal Act, talks much about the documentation that must be in order for one to get tenders. So this is a document that will be very key, helping them. Otherwise, we are still going to be giving businesses to brokers who then go into the market to look for these young guys and give them those jobs. And the bigger chunk of that money goes to the pockets of those who are capable of raising those funds. Finally, on this, he did talk about waiving certificate licensing, that they will not be required to pay any licensing fee, and that is very, very important. And in cases, and again, extend a 7-year moratorium on tax. I mean, give them tax rebates for 7 years until they stabilize their business. So that is very, very key in perpetuating this Jua Kali sector business as a whole. But again, you have asked me a very important question about social protection. And this is the message that Baba has had to preach everywhere he goes about the 6,000. And just as you say, it makes people go crazy. They need that 6,000 yesterday, not even when Baba becomes president. But we must understand that there are parameters that will be employed for one to qualify or a family to qualify to be put within that subset. And that is about no one in the family with an income. So it is not a blanket, gesture to every Kenyan, the 50 million of us. And it has been proven through the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics that you have 2 million families whose livelihood is derived from absolutely under very harsh circumstances. In other words, they have no one who gets any sort of income. So they eat from hand to mouth, finger to tooth, 365 days a year of their lifetime. So Baba is saying, out of these 2 million shillings, why can't we look for 6,000 shillings per household and expend that money to them to at least give them a level of dignity as they live within their homes? Now, President Uhuru Kenyatta, who gets a lot of intelligence information, has already spoken to us about 2 billion shillings lost every day in the hands of crooks in this country. And Baba is saying he has been in government. Martha Karua, the deputy designate, has already been the justice minister. And Baba is saying he knows exactly where those monies can come from and how we can tap into the security apparatus in order to stop pilferages of our monies, so that this 2 billion shillings, that loophole can be sealed. And if you manage to seal 2 billion shillings every day, that is about 700 or about 800 billion shillings in a year, if you adequately seal those loopholes, and we can.
Right. So, Prof, so Prof, let me just bring Prof into this conversation. So, Prof, the question is sustainability of this social protection program. How sustainable is it? Because there's so many plans that Azimio team has, but the question is, where will this money come from?
Thank you. First of all, I didn't hear what my friend said because apparently there was a technical problem. But let me just respond to your question about the source of this money and for sustaining the social protection programs. First, let us look at health before we even talk about these social protection programs. This has fallen down.
All right. So, Prof.
Hello?
Prof, as
yeah. Hello?
Yeah, Prof, kindly continue.
Can you now hear me?
Yes, I can.
I wanted to say this, that if you look at the health sector, for example, where the Azimio Manifesto talks about universal health care, the question many people are asking is, where will this money come from? Let us remind ourselves of the fact that, and this is information from health workers, health professionals, that today, as we speak, there are about 50 million Kenyans, out of which 1.2 million have private medical insurance or health insurance. That 1.2 million, we are told, includes the principal and his or her dependents. Secondly, they tell us that private healthcare, or rather public healthcare insurance, there are about 7 million Kenyans that benefit from the NHIF. And out of these 7 million, that NHIF contribution that they make caters for about 2.5 million Kenyans. In other words, they are dependents. Those who are 18 years and below. Now, the NHIF itself has conducted a survey which then tells us that there are about 3 million Kenyans who cannot pay for their NIH contributions. In total, those who contribute to NHIF contribute about 18 billion Kenya shillings, 18 billion Kenya shillings. Unfortunately, 40% or thereabout of this money that is contributed to NHIF goes to administration. When you think about it very critically, that is fairly high.
Right.
One would have expected that out of this, a maximum of 20% of that would go to administrative costs.
All right.
So the idea here is that you then begin to manage efficiently this money that is contributed by those who contribute to NHIF.
All right.
And if you do that, you will be able actually to to have a shortfall of just about 4 billion shillings.
All right.
To enable every Kenyan, and particularly those who cannot afford, to get access to healthcare.
All right.
These are figures that have been very well thought out, and that is why I think it is right to say that it is possible.
All right.
Secondly,
okay, Prof.
We must also remember, you want me to stop at that?
Yes, just stop at that point, because I also need to pique Jared Okello's mind on this other Azimio's manifesto, education, free education, right from kindergarten to institutions of higher learning. And Jared, I mean, universities are insolvent. As the situation is right now, it looks like they're insolvent because the government is partially funding these universities. They're facing a financial crisis. So how realistic will this plan be?
Well, thank you, Brenda. I'm coming to that in a bit, but I do not want to be overly ambitious and say that when Baba moves into office, he's going to stop the 2 billion thievery on a daily basis. I think I will be overstretching my imagination because those crooks are also listening to us and they are listening to Baba and they are reorienting their schemes. So you cannot say that you are going to stop that on day one. No, I think to be quite realistic, let us say he may manage to stop 1 billion the first 100 days or 1 billion the first 2 years. So that therefore means that we are going to have only 365 billion extra in a year. But also remember that out of the 2 million families at 6,000 shillings, we are only talking about 12 billion shillings per month. That translates into 144 billion per year. So you have 365 billion that has been safeguarded courtesy of certain systems that will be put in place. You have more than enough to pay the 12 billion shillings monthly. But also remember, Brenda, that at the moment, we still have that social protection thing going into families that are, 70 years plus. And I remember it's about 2,000 shillings on a daily basis. So if you are going to put those families also into that scheme, it is only a 4,000 shillings top up over and above the 2,000 that they are getting daily. So it will not even be 2 billion shillings, but let us just overstretch our thinking on that line. Coming to education, Baba has ably said that from primary all the way to tertiary and universities will be free. And he reiterated it yesterday and said, free indeed, meaning therefore that they will not be paying a coin. Brenda, remember, even right now, before we come to the mathematics of what is possible and what is not possible, we have a free secondary day school. What they are paying annually is 9,000 shillings, which goes towards their lunches. Otherwise, the government is taking care of their tuition, their books, and every other thing that is needed in high school. That is now when we haven't even crossed the Rubicon. But this President Uhuru's government has ensured that there is free secondary education for day schools. Now, I remember when President Kibaki took over in the year 2003 and midwifed the free and compulsory primary education, many donor communities came knocking in order that they could help this kind of a program. And I remember President Bill Clinton once said that if there is anyone he's willing to meet, is the Kenyan president who has gotten 1 million children out of the streets and out of homes and plugged them into classrooms. So that is something that is going to resonate very well, not just with us, but the international community. And I can assure you, many donor countries are going to come in order to assist on this front. But again, the pilferages that we have experienced.
But then my question is, Jared Okello, my question is, yes, as you're talking about this big grand free education program, should Raila Odinga clinch that presidency on the 9th of August. But when you look at universities, as it stands, they are insolvent. Government is partially financing them. How realistic will this be? Talking about free education at the universities.
Well, not all universities are insolvent. Some of them, and if you carry out a comprehensive audit, which has been done by the Auditor General, you would see that they also feed into certain corruption scandals that have dogged them. I sit in a committee that was looking at a segment within our universities on trade and the management of their circles, and how they remit monies, but the circles are as well insolvent. So it feeds into mismanagement, it feeds into corruption that has also permeated their systems. I do not think corruption is only going to be fought at the executive level and forget about the management of government institutions.
All right.
This is a war that is going to percolate downwards.
All right.
And everybody who is found culpable will be in for it. But let me put it clearly, Brenda. Once we wake up to prudent management of our resources, without necessarily paying attention to what is it in for me as an individual and not the public good, then I think our nation is going to make huge steps forward.
All right. So let me bring in Prof. Prof, I mean, yesterday the country had Raila Odinga say that when it comes to debt, his administration will really ensure that the country's debt is paid amicably. You know, Kenya is given more time to pay this debt. But the question is, our economy is already heavily debted. So how do you think, or what should the Raila administration do? Should it clinch power? How is it going to deal with the debt situation as a way of ensuring that, yes, you want us to pay our debt in a, given that grace period of paying that debt, but we also need to finish this debt in terms of payment?
Yeah, let me first of all say this, that part of the problem in this country, and we must accept it if we want to improve things, is inefficiency in the manner in which some of our institutions are managed and governed. Government can be very efficient. Unfortunately, a lot of our institutions, of government institutions, are not efficient. So we must inject a high level of efficiency in our government, including accountability of public officers, including state officers, for what they do or fail to do. If we do that, this country can save huge amounts of money that is currently being wasted in terms of, for example, as my brother there said, corruption, misappropriation, and sometimes duplication of functions, and therefore spending money on the same thing, spending money twice on the same thing. I'll give you an example of the Ministry of Health. The Ministry of Health, or rather the health function, is devolved to counties. But we also know for a fact that a number of functions are being performed by the national government when in fact they should be performed by the county governments. And this creates problems. So we need to ensure that we devolve all the functions that are listed in the 4th schedule of the Constitution as devolved functions, and then let funds follow those functions.
All right.
So we need to do that. You asked about universities. Why are universities solvent if they are? We need to address that question. universities are supposed to be, in a sense, run the leaders of these institutions are supposed to run the institutions independently and be able to tell government, look, we cannot admit beyond this number of students.
All right.
Because the resources that we have, including those that come from the state, can only effectively cater for this number of students.
All right.
But what do we see? We see situations where universities, a number of these universities enroll, they compete in terms of enrolling students, but forget about what is required to effectively and efficiently cater for the interests of these students.
All right.
Including, of course, mismanagement and so on. So we need to address that.
All right. So, gentlemen, we are about to bring this conversation to an end. So I'll just give us equal time so that we give a final closing remark. So let me begin with Jared. I mean, we are talking about corruption. This is something Raila talked about yesterday. Corruption and wastage can cost the country a lot of money. And as a way of trying to seal the loopholes of corruption, he laid down, he said, this is what I will do to ensure that we become a corrupt-free country. But what we are seeing is lack of political goodwill, because even during this clearance of some political aspirants, the names are on that list, the radar of ESCC, and the names were even forwarded to the IEBC. So even as much as your presidential candidate is talking about, fighting corruption, is that political will? A good political will?
Well, thank you very much. Let me take it from where you have left. IEBC is currently processing candidates for elections next year. This year, August. But it is true again that they have declined certain requests in order to vindicate the Constitution. Specifically Chapter 6 of our Constitution on leadership and integrity. And the threshold has been put so high up that out of 55 presidential aspirants, only 4 have been cleared. So that at least makes that list quite tidy. Unlike having 55 people you're looking for your candidate, and it takes you hours on end to get to that. But again, there is the investigative authorities. Then we have prosecutorial authorities, and then the judiciary that makes the final determination. If all these institutions are not going to work in sync, then all that Baba is talking about will still be in vain. Because the policeman arrests a culprit presented before a court of law by the DPP, and the judge or the magistrate is so quick to pass over a bond, certain times very cheap bonds, to a culprit who, even though the Constitution says is innocent until proven guilty, but all the evidence as adduced before a magistrate or a judge are indicating some culpability, even though at an initial level. So if our courts of law are also going to play ball and say we are in a new dispensation, whereas the bond is an issue of human rights, but again it is at the discretion of a magistrate, a sitting magistrate or a sitting judge, and that is why a party that is willing to apply for a bond must argue that case before the court. So if our courts are also going to say, let us help this government at least achieve a certain degree of purity in the conduct of their affairs, then I think at that point we are going to have a new country.
All right.
But this is only going to come about if the president is going to call all these people who are involved on a round table and agree on parameters to govern a judicial system.
All right.
Otherwise, we are still going to be on a charade at the end of the day. Brenda.
All right. And Prof, also your closing remarks as you answer this question, still on the administrative continuity, touching on corruption. And, that is one of Azimio's manifesto, talking about custodians of power must be accountable for the mandate bestowed upon them by the electorate, which is you and I, the voters. And it goes ahead to say that the cornerstone of this agenda encompasses battling corruption and ensuring efficiency and optimality in public service delivery. Ensuring that the administrative continuity becomes a reality, especially on this cornerstone of the agenda of encompassing battling corruption and ensuring efficiency and optimality in public service delivery.
Yes, let me say this. One is that corruption is actually a very major problem in this country, and it has to be tackled. Fortunately, very fortunately, we have a presidential candidate who is committed and has demonstrated that in his public life, committed to bringing corruption to an end. And secondly, he has a running mate in the name of Martha Karua, who also in her public life has clearly demonstrated that she abhors corruption and will fight hard to eradicate corruption, at least in the public sector. So we are saying we have two leaders, one a presidential candidate and the other a deputy, who think alike and who are committed to the same thing as far as fighting corruption is concerned. That is something important, and we have not had it anywhere else. We are told, and you said it at the beginning of this discussion, that there are basically two candidates in the name of the leader of Azimio and the leader of UDA. Unfortunately, we have not had as a country any firm commitment on the part of UDA leadership to fight corruption. And that is the same in terms of the leader of UDA as well as his deputy that he has nominated. So we are saying we have two different groups of people here, or leaders. On the one hand, we have those that think alike in terms of fighting corruption. On the other, we have those who are either silent about corruption and indeed sometimes have said they will not make corruption an agenda unless pushed very hard. So that thinking, that similar thinking, is good for this country.
All right.
And let me add this, that in terms of those that have been named as corrupt, you find them from both sides of the political divide. So when sometimes we hear one side saying that corruption is being used to hit at them and not the other side, they are actually lying to the public. Right. Even the IBC list that was presented by the EAC, this Anti-Corruption Commission, has people from both sides.
Right.
Now you ask yourself, what will make the leader of Azimio fight corruption when some of his people on his political divide are also in corruption? Let me just remind you that we have had in Rwanda President Kagame ensuring that one of his very close confidants was taken to jail, very close to him. We also know of cases in South Africa where President Mbeki and President Zuma were recalled from leadership of their parties and subsequently of the country by their own party because of allegations or accusations of corruption.
All right.
So they did it. We have had cases in Indonesia, I think it was in 2016,
right,
where the president of Indonesia actually ensured that his Minister for Social Affairs was actually jailed for 5 years for involvement in corruption.
All right.
So it is possible, and since the Azimio presidential candidate and his running mate are committed, they think alike in terms of fighting corruption, I don't see why that will not be exercised to fight corruption. So let us, as Kenyans, make a wise decision and elect the right leadership. Because without good leadership, this country will not transform, and yet we need transformation.
All right. Thank you so much on that note, Professor Peter Wanyande, a political scientist and also a political analyst right there, joining us from a City Center studio for this important discussion. And also Nyando, Member of Parliament, Jared Okello, asante sana for joining us virtually for this conversation about the Azimio promise that Raila Odinga gave yesterday to his supporters. So it's just a matter of months before Kenyans go back to the polls to elect the man and woman, or a duo that they deem to be fit to manage this country for the next 5 years. So gentlemen, asante sana for your time. But then, meanwhile, the Ministry of Education is set to inspect the preparedness of private schools for junior secondary. Education Cabinet Secretary Professor George Magoha says the government seeks to establish whether schools have adequate infrastructure for the junior secondary rollout. And as Shadrach Miti reports, the latest World Bank report